All right, let's jump right into this explainer by addressing a pretty glaring evolutionary mystery. Because when you really think about it, human babies are kind of biological disasters. You're born unable to walk, unable to talk, you can't feed yourself, and you have absolutely zero concept of what a predator even is. So, how on earth did our species actually survive?
Think about it. You were born completely helpless into a world filled with leopards, hyenas, and snakes, predators that could literally smell a newborn from a quarter mile away. Survival in that kind of brutal environment was never about individual strength. It was all about an ingenious, ancient social technology. If even one of your direct ancestors had failed at this, you simply wouldn't exist right now.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1, the helpless infant problem, 2, the big brain trade-off, 3, the cooperative breeding strategy, 4, ancient survival technologies, and finally 5, the modern parenting mismatch. Let's start right off with Section 1, the helpless infant problem, a biological disaster waiting to happen.
Think about this stark contrast between us and the rest of the animal kingdom. A newborn horse can literally stand up and trot within hours of being born. Even our closest relatives, chimpanzees, can grip their mother's fur and hold on tightly from the very first minute of life. But human infants? They are born completely unfinished. They can't even hold up their own heads. They can't walk for roughly a year, and they absolutely cannot survive a single night alone. Of all the primates on Earth, we are born the most uniquely defenseless.
Which leads us to exactly why that is. Section 2, the big brain trade-off, or, the price of intelligence.
Anthropologists call this phenomenon secondary altriciality. Now, that sounds pretty academic, but it basically boils down to something called the obstetric dilemma. See, the human brain is so enormously powerful that if it grew to its full proportion inside the womb, the baby's skull would simply never fit through the birth canal. So evolution made a rather clever, if slightly terrifying, trade-off. We essentially give birth to premature babies by design. And to put that into perspective, get a load of this staggering number. At birth, your brain was only 25% of its adult size. Just 25. For comparison, a chimpanzee is born at about 45%. This means that 75% of your brain development had to happen entirely on the outside, completely exposed to the elements and predators, while you were entirely dependent on other people. We ended up with the most powerful brain on the planet, sure, but the ultimate price was being the most helpless infant on the planet. Because raising a child alone under those conditions was physically impossible, we were forced into a radical evolutionary pivot. Section 3, the cooperative breeding strategy. It takes a literal village.
Humans evolved as cooperative breeders. The anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy makes this devastatingly simple argument. Humans are just not like other great apes. A mother chimp raises her offspring completely solo and will actively attack anyone who tries to touch her baby. Humans, we are the exact opposite. We survived specifically because we shared the weight. It takes a village wasn't just some modern motivational poster. It was literal, hardwired biological survival engineering.
Let's look at the actual data here, because it is just mind-blowing. Among the FA foragers in the Congo, researchers found that a single baby is held by an average of 14 different people in just an 8-hour period. 14. The infant changes hands roughly 8 times every single hour. The mother is actually only holding the baby about 40% of the time. The other 60% of the day, that baby is being passed between aunts, older siblings, grandmothers, and neighbors. And the integration of the whole family was absolute. Fathers in the Akat tribe of Central Africa, for instance, are within arm's reach of their infants 47% of the time. And these aren't modern men trying out a new parenting trend. They are living the way humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years. The social architecture built around our ancestors was extraordinarily dense.
This brings us to a wildly fascinating survival strategy. In most of the animal kingdom, bodies naturally break down and die shortly after they can no longer reproduce. But human women routinely live for decades past menopause. Why? Well, anthropologist Kristen Hawkes proposed the grandmother hypothesis. Evolution actually found it way more efficient for older women to stop having their own babies so they could use their vast foraging experience to keep their grandchildren alive. A grandmother digging for roots in the sun was very often the literal difference between a child living and starving.
So how did this all practically work? Let's move to Section 4. Ancient survival technologies, the physical methods of the collective. Let's see exactly how they kept these fragile babies alive day in and day out. Basically, every primary survival method of our ancestors was a distributed communal response. A baby left on the ground was, well, a dead baby, so they carried them constantly. They shared breastfeeding duties, they slept pressed against one another to regulate the infant's breathing, and they pre-chewed food. It was this incredibly tight, complete web of physical connection. And a really crucial point about that constant carrying is that it wasn't just for transportation. It was survival technology. When a human infant is held tightly against a body, its heart rate drops and it naturally stops crying. We call this the transport response. So when you pick up a screaming newborn today and it suddenly calms down against your chest, that's not just them getting cozy. That is a 300,000-year-old predator evasion reflex running inside your child's nervous system. They go quiet so they don't attract a hyena and get you both killed. Feeding was also wildly communal and strategic. Breastfeeding lasted a minimum of 2 to 4 years. This naturally suppressed ovulation and ensured a critical 3 to 4 year gap between children. Because without that gap, trying to carry 2 helpless infants at once was pretty much a death sentence. The community also wet nursed each other's kids. And solid food, they used premastication. Adults would chew tough meat and roots and pass it lip to lip into the baby's mouth, which introduced vital digestive enzymes and immune cells. Actually, some anthropologists think this is the evolutionary origin of human kissing. Pretty wild, right? Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the modern parenting mismatch and the biological gap it creates today. Think about it like this. For the entirety of human history, a mother had between 5 and 15 people actively helping her every single day. Today, the contrast is just jarring. Parents are sitting in isolated apartments at 3 a.m. with a screaming infant, operating in separate rooms with no grandmother down the path and no aunt in the next shelter over to hand the baby to. If you take anything away from this explainer today, please let it be this. Modern parental burnout is absolutely not a failure of character. It is an evolutionary mismatch. For 300,000 years, the question was never whether one person could raise a child. The biological answer to that was always a resounding, obvious no. The question was whether enough people in the group cared to keep that child alive. Now, we definitely must acknowledge the incredible progress we've made. Vaccines, clean water, antibiotics. These have collapsed child mortality by roughly 96% since 1800. We built extraordinary medical technology to keep children physically safe. But in the process of industrializing and modernizing, we completely dismantled the ancient social structure. We traded that dense, overlapping, distributed network of human care for baby bouncers, separate nurseries, and deep geographic isolation. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. We have conquered the biological threats that once killed half of all children before they could even walk. But our infants' brains and bodies, they are literally still expecting the village. So the great challenge of our modern era isn't about giving up our medical miracles. It's asking, how can we rebuild the social technology we left behind?